I had zero idea that this was going on. I mean, I just completely randomly popped in off the street. The penny started to drop. I saw the exhibition notes that Collings had written. By the way, I'd never heard of Matthew Collings. This screed was like this A4 block of text that I could just see the words Zionism and hell like repeatedly, plus like these disgusting crimes that he'd imagined Israel was responsible for. I'm in the fray. Like, I'm aware of the kinds of things that pass for legitimate in this debate, none of which are. But this was such next level. Israeli Jews were all pictured spewing blood. Some of them were in the IDF, like stamping on skulls. I thought, look, I have a duty here. I mean, maybe these guys haven't even met a Jew. Maybe it just takes someone saying to them, like, guys, this is like completely insane and unacceptable. So I did speak to the man, and he was immediately just horrible, shouting at me, cutting me down. It was just like this, this specificity of his hatred. It's just like he's getting in there with like Jewish lingo and repurposing it to throw back in the face of the Jew he's been antagonizing.
Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Zoe Strimpel. Zoe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brendan. Great to be here.
It's great to have you back on. It's been quite a few years since you were last on, so I'm very happy to see you again. I want to talk to you about your new book, which is called Good Slut, and it's as brilliant as the title suggests. But before we get to that, I do want to ask you about a recent incident that you were involved in, which shocked a lot of people, caused a bit of a kind of global discussion, which is that you went down to Margate. There was an exhibition of crazy drawings by Matthew Collings, which I think were very bigoted and quite ugly. And you had an experience there. You basically got booted out. Could you give us a sense of what was the exhibition like? What was the atmosphere like in that place?
Well, you could tell you'd gone into, you know, Palestine Main Street because everyone was wearing like, you have those like different types of garb that signals different levels of commitment to, are you just a sort of, you know, entry level, yeah, Palestine's cool, or are you like full blown Hamas is like the resistance, bring on Hamas? And this is, I could feel that it was probably the latter from the minute I walked in, but in that very kind of white progressive way where it's like way too over the top. And so everyone was wearing their like multicolored keffiyehs, which were very much draped rather than just as a scarf. And you could just tell that was where this exhibition was kind of like leaning into that. So just to, be clear, and I'm not, some people didn't realize this. I had zero idea that this was going on. I mean, I just completely randomly popped in off the street because I thought, well, just gonna like follow the art trail in Margate, and people are going in. So there's this cute little gallery. Just it was I stepped through a looking glass or through a breach or something, and behind there was this kind of intensity. So there's all these people. They were drinking Gaza cola. They were just clearly like everyone in our society, pretty much, but just more.
Yeah.
So I then was still like, okay, well, this might just still be like the normal Margate arty scene because, we all know that that's what they're like. And then I started to see, the penny started to drop. I saw the exhibition notes that Collings had written. By the way, I'd never heard of Matthew Collings before this, but it turns out he says documentaries for the BBC. He tried to be like a Labour councillor, but he was like a respected figure in the art world, very much establishment and a well-known artist. But this screed was like this A4 block of text that I could just see the words Zionism and hell like repeatedly, plus like these disgusting crimes that he'd imagined Israel was responsible for. Like if you go to the outer edges of a Nazi imagination, which is sexualized, there's a charge of sexual like excrement, like it's that level. And that was, in there. Then I remembered, oh crap, there's stuff on the walls. I better go look at that. And then I was just like, I could now, Brendan, like you, I'm in the fray. Like I'm aware of the kinds of things that pass for legitimate in this debate, none of which are right from, Israel's committed genocide to, apartheid, whatever it is. But this was such next level, partly because not only because of the nakedness of the kind of script he'd written around it, like the it was like every Owen Jones Twitter post amped up times a million and then rendered in very, like, toddlerish terms, almost whiny, actually. And then the imagery was so powerful because it was so, clearly speaking to the Nazi, like, visual, grammar, and so that was very startling, and then there were the specifics, which we are rightly meant to feel uncomfortable about, such as swastikas intermingled with stars of David, sometimes lightly disguised as the Israeli flag, sometimes not. Powerful figures linked to swastikas, linked to the word Israel, Epstein, Jews, Israeli Jews. There were no Israeli Arabs pictured. These were Israeli Jews plus just Jews. The Israeli Jews were all pictured spewing blood. Some of them were in the IDF, like stamping on skulls, stamping on babies. Um, the one that so I'm walking around and I'm just feeling like that feeling that you have where one, what you're seeing is disgusting and horrible and upsetting because it's basically saying these people are beneath humanity. They're not even scum, therefore they're fair game. So that was it's just someone being absolutely horrible to you in some way, and that's the feeling. That's just the emotional response. Then there's the feeling that you're witnessing incitement and that there's a degree of danger in that. Not that they were about to turn on me and kill me, but I was seeing something that ta taps into what we see in many different forms in our society in things that aren't punished, which I think make things much more dangerous for Jews. 2 days later, we had the ambulances exploding in Golders Green. There's clearly some kind there is I don't wanna be too glib about the link, but there is you could say that our society kind of offers these pathways to violence partly because of what I was seeing here, just it was just much clearer. Um, and then I also just had the feeling that it was unfair that this guy was getting away with this, when it was like, people have been called up for by the police for misgendering. So how do we have that? And then this situation, how was I able to walk off the street as a Jewish person and see this stuff, feel what I was feeling, know that it was clearly, well, I say clearly, hate crime or this was not legal, I didn't think because it was incitement. And then to be confront the dirty scumbag himself, this nasty, fat, smelly, mean-eyed, with an obsession, a complete living, breathing obsession. It's clear the man does not think about anything other than what he would like to do to Israel and Israelis. And some of it involved the kind of the image, I'm sure, that showed Netanyahu. It doesn't say Netanyahu. It's just a Jewish Israeli man with a penis, a circumcised penis, erect, pointing to those tattooed words, Greater Israel, and Israel on his thigh. And obviously, that to me was like a blatant evocation of Auschwitz, except it was so fucked up. So, yeah. So I was just like in this state of yeah, I don't really like conflict in person, actually, despite writing all this, like, sort of inflammatory stuff, which I don't do to be inflammatory. I just do it because it's true and right. But I thought, look, I have a duty here. I mean, maybe these guys haven't even met a Jew. Maybe it just takes someone saying to them, like, guys, this is like completely insane and unacceptable. So I did speak to the man, and he was immediately just horrible, shouting at me, cutting me down, accusing me of using these Hasbara talking points. And it was just like this creepy, this specificity of his hatred is just like he's getting in there with like Jewish lingo and repurposing it to throw back in the face of the Jew he's been antagonizing. And then, I couldn't really get a word in. There was no point. I realized I kind of wanted to just see what I was dealing with. I saw and I said I was gonna call the police because it would look that, once when I said it was like I was shocked that he was using Nazi imagery in this way. He was very much persecutory and incitement. And I said, he was like, "Yeah, what do you expect?" He was proud of his Nazi imagery. He was proud of producing a Der Stürmer against the Jews, but really, like, he was I guess the implication was that's what the Jews do to the Palestinians, whatever it was, it was so horrendous. And, and then the real kicker came when I said, "Well, I'm gonna have to call the police." And he was just jeering at me. "Yeah, call the police. That's right. Go outside on your little telephone, get your telephone out, call the police. Go on, go on, go on." And he kept barking, couldn't say anything. I was just being, "Go on, go on, go on, call the police. Get out, go on, call the police." And then I said, "Yeah, and I'm gonna call the CST," because he had one of his illustrations was about the Community Security Trust, which is the body that keeps Jews safe or monitors anti-Semitic hate crime. So this is also just repurposed and spat back out by this monster. And then he was like, "I think you should leave, and you're just repeating Zionist Hasbara talking points because you want to defend a genocide." On and on and on. Everyone was crowding around at this point with their keffiyehs and their Gaza colas, and the woman who'd taken off her jacket to reveal the Hamas inverted triangle and the words "globalize the Intifada" over it with her little girl like nestled against it, which made me sick and very upset actually, because I just don't think it should be okay for in any way. I mean, I did think about contacting the social services. I mean, this little girl's being exposed to this stuff. And then they were all like, yeah, they like kind of turned in on me and were like, yeah, go, whatever. And someone was quite aggressively snapping pictures of me. And I left and I was, yeah, I was like, okay, well, I guess my nice weekend in Margate is no longer like little chill time for me. So yeah, and then I did speak to the CST who were dubious about what kind of police response might be, and then I spoke to the police, and they were obviously out of their depth with it, and I immediately realized that the nub of this issue was partly the question of how are we in a society where like every tiny microaggression toward like made up microaggression is fanatically guarded against, policed, socially condemned. Everyone speaks up. The grandees of all individual music scene, art scene, whatever the scene is, they will speak up on behalf of the Muslims or the trans people, whatever it is. And how are we then in this position where I can walk off the street and I'm used to high level anti-Semitism throughout our society anyway, and see something that even so gets through that my skin shocks me and makes me think these people are calling for our blood. And that how is that how have we got there? Is it just two-tier policing? Is there another policing issue? Is the law unclear? Nobody seemed to be very clear on the law. So I've been doing some digging, and it is a complicated situation. It's not as simple as the police are anti-Semitic institutionally and bad people. Like it's just not as simple as that. So what is going on? Um, and yeah, so that's what happened. And I so far I've given a statement to the police, a 2-hour long statement, but I don't know, as I've heard from Dave Rich at the CST, it would be and he's probably right, it'd be a big move to, prosecute an artist in a democracy.
You've said some funny things there, but I know that it was quite a harrowing experience for you, and your descriptions of it that I read were just shocking. And I'm not Jewish, but I imagine that if I had been in that gallery and seeing that stuff, I would have flipped as well, and probably would have done exactly what you did. But the thing that they will say, of course, which they always say, is that this is not anti-Semitism, this is anti-Zionism. And the thing that strikes me, and I know that it strikes you as well, is the commonalities between these two things are just undeniable now, especially when you've got pictures that do echo 1930s propaganda. The Jews as bloodthirsty, as demonic, they love to kill people, they're sinister, they're depraved. The descriptions I've read of some of the so-called art have been incredibly shocking. So, what do you say when these people say this is about Palestine and Israel? It's not about the Jews. What's your
Yeah.
response?
Well,
Not
my
only in
response
relation to this exhibition, but generally when people
yeah.
say that.
I mean, my response to has always been and has never changed, and that's why it doesn't matter, like, what the Israeli government is saying, that's all bullshit, nobody ever means that, even though, it could be legitimate. I always say, "Listen, people," and I tried to say this to the policeman, and it was just not the right conversation to be having with a Kent, like, police officer, which was, it's the Jewish state. The point is, it's not any other state. So if you're saying, "Oh, it's totally legit, it's just a state, we can criticize it in any way we want," and by criticize, what you really mean is delegitimize, demonize, you know, bestialize. Um, no, you can't. And the reason for that is it has a big fat Star of David as its flag. Like that's the problem. That's what causes people nobody until we reckon with the fact that, it's I think we should be having to call it the Jewish state much more just to remind people because people seem completely flummoxed about the connection. Well, okay, you can just have a repeat of what happened, with Jeremy Corbyn's party, for instance. It was so funny. There kept being more and more outrageous, evidence of just like rabid, not even hiding under the anti-Zionism, just anti-Semitism. And they'd be like, we condemn anti-Semitism. I mean, that's obviously what everyone keeps saying now, too. Even Zach Polanski. I mean, it was absurd. And then it's like, oh, I wonder why that keeps happening. Could it be linked to the fact that your whole party is entirely driven by fear and loathing of the Jewish state? Like, and I just think it's as simple as that. You're talking about the Jewish state. So if you hate it, you hate the Jews of the Jewish state. Like, that is what it is. It is still the Jewish state. It is the Jewish homeland. And this policeman was saying, yeah, but it's just the Israeli state he's criticizing. And I'm saying, listen, Israel has kind of slightly confused people because it is both a state and it's the Jewish state. And I don't think there are any, I mean, obviously all the Islamic states that exist, they have, you could say, you could probably say similar things for them, but I mean, it's a bit different in terms of the homeland element. Yeah. So, and then I would also say that the very premise of the point is always false. It's always like heaped up with lies. It's always this idea that the Palestinians. Well, who are the Palestinians? What are they? What do they do? What is it that we're defending? What is it that we're supporting? And what is the alleged injustices exactly that we're accusing Israel of here? What does history say about that? What are your sources? Are you just drawing on anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist sources, which are the vast majority? And so this is why I find it very hard to kind of have dialogue on this question because the other side is coming at it through so many lies and falsehoods that are baked into what is considered normal now. So it's very hard to even engage on like a normal footing without sounding like you're mad yourself. Like if you say, but Israel isn't committing genocide, people say, well, the New York Times said, there's all these legitimate references around that make you feel mad. So in a way, I just say, well, yeah, it's the Jewish state, and everything you're assuming in that question is based on falsehoods that you're getting from the entire media, basically.
Yeah, I say the Jewish state all the time now. So just to confront people with the fact that the only state that they want to destroy and the state that they continually refer to as uniquely barbarous, child killing machine, bloodthirsty, they need to know they're talking about the Jewish state, the Jewish homeland.
I wish that Israel hadn't called itself Israel and had just literally called itself Judenstaat, and that, like, everyone would have to say that every time they referred to it. It would help people a little bit with this apparently crazy conceptual leap between Israel and the Jews.
What has been the feedback to I mean, you work in the media, of course. You work in a more sensible part of the media. You write for the Telegraph, you write for the Spectator, good people around those publications. But there is a large section of the media establishment that is completely nuts, especially on this issue. Like the Guardian's coverage of the Jewish state and the BBC's coverage has been insane. What has been the response to your experience in Margate? Has it had much coverage beyond what you've written? And we wrote a review of the exhibition on Spiked as well. Do people take it seriously in your experience? Do your media friends take it seriously?
I think people it basically the Times and the the anything left of the Times, including the Times, hasn't been has studiously ignored it and pretended it doesn't exist, which I think is telling. Everyone else has been very interested in it. And I
Mm.
think it has, because of what I sensed when I was there, this isn't just your ordinary stuff. This is next level. And I think it just was because it's rendered in such offensive visual terms. I think it just did finally manage to strike a chord. And then I think with the immediacy of the ambulances, it was just a nice, clear another nice, clear not nice, another clear moment of of the problem that we have in our midst that, is gonna keep cropping up, every time there's, like, murders at a synagogue or whatever. But this one was, I think, a little bit in a different category because nobody was physically hurt, there was no physical violence with mine, but it spoke to the levels of how low of what dangerous and morally disgusting beliefs, I suppose, are presented as art or respectable and then defended by all these great and good people, not one of whom has spoken out about Matthew Collings at all. No one has said, "Right, I'm gonna sell all my Matthew Collingses and donate it to the CST." One couple apparently has done that, they were Jewish. So, the response has been like a media storm, but on the, as I say, the kind of right of center. But and people on Twitter, basically people around the world. Oh, at Times of Israel, the Israeli embassy, yeah, it had wide reach. But I think that I found myself very quickly in this conundrum because I don't just wanna have it be about, like, my bad day at Margate and how like, upset it made me. Like, the outrage factory is already like in very full swing and healthy swing with Jews. We do it all the time. We're just, constantly and correctly outraged. But I wanted it to go somewhere, and I'm trying to figure out where that somewhere is. And the first step, I think, is understanding what is going on in that breach between government and police, and the CPS, and B, where should the finger of blame, are we perhaps pointing it too much at the police, and should it be pointing more robustly at at civil society, which is silent? How these people are enabled, how they are celebrated, how no one in the art world speaks up, how, this could apply to anything, education, music, dance. The whole cultural sphere is rotten, and it's not sea level, and I think that's what this exhibition showed. That's why it hit a chord. It wasn't like, "Oh, they're a bit pro-Palestine," which is what everyone always used to indulge people with. "Oh, they're a bit progressive, and they really care about other things." No, they don't. This
Yeah.
is the one they'll really bat for, and they will lay down their lives for this one. So yeah, so this that anti-Semitism issue. But I mean, this is a good bridging point in a way because the Spectator ignored it as well, actually. Michael, as in Gove. Maybe he thought it had been done. And also, I confess, like I say, oh, I don't want it to be about me and my outrage. Well, I kind of do want the credit for having had to go through the experience in order to break it to everyone else. So, Camilla Long, who I rate hugely, and who I know a bit, wrote her column about it in the Sunday Times, but she severed the story from me. So that was a kind of part two of this thing. It's kind of she's given it a life of its own. I do think it would have been nice if she'd sort of attributed it to where it began, because I think the way it happened was quite sort of telling. But anyway, so it's having a life of its own. But and I'm getting a lot of abuse online. I mean, plenty of abuse. But the usual. I mean, we all get that. So it's almost not even worth. You can imagine it's not even worth commenting on. The anti What I get for being a noisy, opinionated Jewish Zionist woman is like, I mean, you can imagine the Venn diagram. It's like just everyone's biggest hatreds. And that's why it's the thing that is right and is probably the recipe for what we should, it's probably the best utopia would be one of Zionist whores, which is kind of why I wrote my book. Just to piss off, just to check that all the right people would be um angered by it. And so I confess it's been a bit bruising. The Zionism stuff, the Margate reaction and the abuse I get, I don't care. It's just obvious, like, well, we all know what those battle lines are. But Brendan, poke the feminist bear at your own peril. I mean, I have been quite taken aback by the vitriol that I've received from female reviewers of my book who are completely barking up the wrong tree. Like, I was very careful in my book to anticipate their pushback.
Mhm.
And they just weren't interested. And so I think that this is an example of, and I'm writing this book for women because I want women to not go down the toilet. Women are flushing themselves down the toilet right now, and they're doing it partly by their political insanity, which involves, for instance, preferring the ayatollahs or whatever, the Iranian regime, to thinking that any reference to Iranian women's freedom is just like George Bush style feminism washing. That's the level at which they're looking at this. The cluelessness, the absurd identification with theocratic sadists who hate women. And we know that women are like the fangirls of Polanski. The all young women want to vote green, and all the young women who voted for Mamdani, and it's chickens voting for KFC or whatever. And it's happening in the discourse around women as well. And it's that which kind of made me want to write this book. It's just like, no, no, no. And this is why when I see women be awesome, especially like when they're fighter pilots in the IDF or winning like little girls from India who are chess champions, like grandmasters or things like that, I feel such pride. It literally makes my year because I remember that I'm right, which is that girls and women are just have can do everything that they may want that is considered to be, a male domain, and it's just rubbish. And so they can absolutely be fighter pilots. Doesn't mean they're as physically strong as men, but there's still a lot of talking ourselves down, and it's now being done through these totally dopey politics. So I think it's all connected.
Yeah, I agree. So this is your book, Good Slut, How Money, Sex, and Power Set Women Free. I mean, it is a brilliant read. It's really saucy. I don't know if you're allowed to use that word anymore these
Yeah,
days, but it's very provocative.
I'm a filthy Lindy.
Yeah, it's a great counterblast against, as you say, talking women down, which comes from both the right and the left these days, from all sections of society. I love the fact that you say that you often get called a Zionist whore, and then you
Mm,
say in the book, "Well, that's a great thing to be. Why not?" Because that does run so counter to some of those things you've just mentioned there. When you think about the fact that we've got young, so-called progressive women marching on the streets with Islamists, and with other women wearing the hijab or the burqa, all of them linked together in this Islamo left lunatic asylum, calling for the destruction of the Jewish state or calling for victory to the Islamic Republic. I mean, to get into some of the themes of the book, what role do you think that kind of Islamo left politics plays? Because that's quite current in terms of talking women down or causing some of these problems.
well, I think the Islamo left is just one of the features of a branch of feminism, which has basically become the branch of feminism, which is that you kind of lead with whatever underdog. No, it's partly underdog narrative, but it's also the obsession with power. And that word power is so central to academia, the post structural, everything becomes about power, which is like you can never pinpoint what power is, but it's just the thing that the people you hate have. Um, Even though you're leveraging your own power through pretend, it's a very, it's a very malign thread that runs through all of the things these Islamo leftists are learning at university, and it's the third thing you learn now. You latch onto it, like, they probably learn it in primary school. I mean, power, power, power. Who has the power? Who and how what can we read from that? And I suppose, like, there's the same people who buy into the post-colonial idea of, like, the settler colonialist who's grabbed the power, the white people with their power, the white privilege, the unjust basically, the unjust, cruel racist seizure of power is probably and then its usage through capitalism and what have you to pollute the planet and make life even worse for the powerless who are the poor third world, or sorry, whatever it's called now, developing world, global south, excuse me, people. And so what the people I'm kind of arguing against on the left in this book are those who deploy that sort of thinking for just every woman's state of being. So we must so with them it's always about power, and so it's about structures of power. Okay, which is a very sinister term. Whenever you hear that, just always know that bullshit is being spoken, or like systems of power. So if you have that view, your view, there's nothing you can say to that because there's a structure of power that is speaking through you. And what happens in that structure of power is that women are being spoken through by the forces of patriarchy and neoliberalism, and the result is that everything is terrible for us. Then there's the very specific abuses that apparently, we learned in Me Too, which was, I want to be clear. I mean, I've heard some shocking things that are from Me Too, and it was eye opening. However, there was also a lot of jumping on the, entryism, jumping on the Me Too bandwagon in order to think, oh, great, we've got another way we can, seize power for ourselves by pretending to be victimized. Don't approach us because we'll just shut you down with our, you're going to be a predator or whatever. So it's so draining and depressing and wrong. This idea that to be a woman now, if you're on the left, is to be um run down by the system, the medical system. So people who don't give a damn about your endometriosis, your adenomyosis, your infertility issues, your this, your that, your menstruation, your mood fluctuations, your perimenopause, all. I mean, you'd think that to be a woman is literally just to have like lots of issues with your reproductive body. Now, those things are true, and they are bad and they need to be dealt with. There was a serious problem in the history of women's um the whole history actually of the world, women's complaints being dismissed, and that is not okay, and it's led to death, misery, etc. To say that in 2026 Britain, that somehow the whole system is rigged against women's bodies again, that, and to be a woman is to just be hormones, it's just to be in pain, it's to have problems, and it's to have to speak about those problems because otherwise we are being overrun roughshod over. I find it very embarrassing, limiting. I think it's a kind of over the top taking of what's private and making very public, but in a way that kind of makes it even worse. I get embarrassed when I see giant ads on the tube for like vaginal dryness. There was one I saw yesterday, like foggy up here, dry down there. Like come and see this menopause, like or perimenopause thing. And it's taking us back to like out of our minds, out of our brains, out of our ability to think, reason, make, create, work, plot. It's all taking us back to our bodies, and that's what part of the reason is that it's a very easy way to cry victimhood if you can do that. Our society, Britain 2026, whatever, the universities, the culture through which young people are going is you'd have to be a really rare person, very independently minded to be able to understand that you are being asked to pinpoint as many points of victimhood as you possibly can and to think about whether you need to do all that. And as a woman, as women, I don't see how young women are now coming through without thinking of themselves primarily as somehow victimized, even when they're really aggressive, confident, and girls at private schools on the lacrosse pitch, they probably still feel victimized. Then you get all the stuff about the very real issues. The thing is, there are real issues here, and I'm very clear in the book. I'm not saying anyone's making stuff up about things that happen with boys and nudes on TikTok, whatever it is they share, sexual shaming, and all the bad things that happen through having smartphones for young people, and all that happens. But by the time a girl leaves and goes into the world, no wonder they all want to just read about how they're being screwed over and like victimized by technology, by the tech bros in Silicon Valley, by the men of our system, by the capitalist system, by the neoliberal system, by the health system. And by the time you've got to the end of this, you're just like, why don't I just like hide under my duvet and never move? And while I'm at it, like I need Freud because I'm now hysterical with all the things that are wrong with me. And how sad is that? At the exact moment when girls can do anything they want, they could be astronauts. There will be millions of schemes available to encourage girls to get into fields that were formerly mocked for wanting to go into. The world is passing us by and we're just busy complaining about it, and we have such a great world there now. That's the point of what. And I'm sorry, I'm on my spiel now, but Brendan, I think you'll agree. We're at a juncture. Do we care about do we want to know what the West is? Do we have a West? Does the West exist? And if so, what are its defining features? What are its values? What's good about the West? Is it worth defending? Are we going to defend it? Or are we just like halfway through our suicide, so we'll just keep going with that then. And I think, the women, the reason I'm using sounds terrible. The reason women are women and Jews, but women are 50% of the population. But a society that can handle and provide women's freedom is that's the West. That's the West. Like, I mean, maybe Kurdish societies to a degree, like some isolated other examples. And so I just see us trashing all that. And I see on the right, I mean, I'll get onto that next.
Well, it's funny you say that about women and Jews because I remember last year, maybe it was April last year, on the same weekend, there was a trans protest at which people were saying, hang J.K. Rowling and kill the witches or whatever. And at the same time, there was a protest against Israel, against the Jewish state, at which people were carrying bloodied dolls in shrouds. And I remember seeing these two protests and thinking, right, we've gone backwards because it is now acceptable again, like it was in the medieval times, to call for the death of witches and to call Jews the killers of children. And the marriage of those two things, I think, is incredibly a depressing analysis of our times, I think.
It is, and it's so my view is like the reason Zionism and feminism should be linked, and I'm very tempted to sort of just go out there and say, if you're a true Zionism is feminism. I mean, Zionism is anything that's good, basically. And that sounds facetious, but it's essentially what Alana Newhouse wrote in her essay in Tablet the other day. I mean, Zionism is a program. Okay, there are problems with Israel, obviously. Sometimes I go to Israel and I'm like, some of you guys are assholes. Why am I devoting my life to defending you? But then, of course, because it's the right thing to do. And some of them are great, obviously, including my family. Um, but if you believe in things like self-determination, autonomy, and freedom for people, including those hated people, i.e., women and Jews, who have been the most oppressed literally, not the bullshit way we use it now to this, in Britain, but really oppressed throughout history. Well, we know it's women and Jews. I mean, so in a way, it's like if you're willing to extend your belief, yeah, that basically people deserve to live their lives without being constantly kind of constrained and mocked in fear of violence, then it really should be commutable. And I think a lot of people think I'm going way too far when I say that Bonnie Blue is a sign of the health of our society rather than, people really cannot get on board. It's too much for everyone. But my reasoning isn't that what Bonnie Blue is doing is good. I don't care what I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's a moral question. It's all consensual. It's not illegal. She's making money out of it. She's happy with it. They're happy with it. We may say it's terrible, and it probably is. I mean, I'd hate to do it myself. I'd hate anyone I know to do it or any child of mine. But to have a society where Bonnie Blue can operate, where you can have someone who's such a folk devil who can operate on the most screamingly shocking, offensive boundary of female sexual behavior, get away with it without being imprisoned, having her assets stripped, being having laws changed to prevent her type from ever doing it again, stoned to death in the street. I think it's amazing because she's so offensive. In fact, it's the fact that she's so offensive that is amazing that she can sort of survive. And I'm not, and people, oh, you want to return to the Ladette culture and all that. I mean, I don't care. If you want to do Ladette culture, do Ladette culture. I'm not putting a moral point on anyone's sexual decisions, and that's my point. I think I think Israeli Jews have the right to determine um, how they opt in or opt out of mm, well, of they get a right to have lives as well, which are free from violence, and they can live those lives however they want. And I think, young women in our culture, they are also cognizant people who can make decisions. And some of them opt in to a period of what we call very pearl clutchingly unhealthy sex. And then they decide they don't like it or they experience some trauma from it and life goes on, although, they've learned some lessons and they regret it or people have been bad to them, or they choose to not do that at all. And having come through that system myself, I was really in it in my whole of my 20s. I was one of the only ones, right? Most people opt out. You can opt in, you can opt out. You can do it sometimes you don't. Young women are also people with brains and they can make decisions. And the narrative is just incredibly really infantilizing when you think about it. It's that there can only be we had to constantly police the degree to which women's sexual choices are healthy or unhealthy. And I'm sick of it. Why? We're wasting our time. There's such great stuff to be gained from letting women and women letting themselves just lean in to their appetites, whether and promiscuity. And I use that word because it's so threatening to people. It doesn't have to be sexual promiscuity. It can be promiscuity. You want many different, ways of making money. Might be interests. It might be friends. It might be trips. It might be anything. You might want money, sex, and power, just like men have always wanted. And why would you think that men have always wanted it for like false consciousness reasons? Women must only want it because they're trying to be like men. No, those things are guiding human drives, and women are humans too, just like Jews are humans too.
To come on to the not Bonnie Blue per se, although feel free to speak more about Bonnie Blue, but the sexual revolution, and you talk in your book about a woman's right to be a shag queen, which is a great line. Preferable, I think shag queen is far preferable to ladette. Although, like you, I don't care if a girl wants to be a ladette, knock yourself out. Um, but the sexual revolution, it has been knives out for the sexual revolution over the past. I mean, it has been for decades, but notably over the past couple of years there's been this rise of reactionary feminism, this rise of trad wife culture, this idea that the sexual revolution was a catastrophic error. It completely disrupted the global order. Contraception is a disaster and it ruins women's bodies. Abortion is a nightmare. These arguments are now quite commonplace and increasingly mainstream, at least in the media. What have you made of that turn against the sexual revolution? What do you think underpins that, and what might the consequences of it be? The kind of counter sexual revolution that we seem to be going through.
Well, one consequence is abortion rights overturned in the US, in lots of states in the US. I mean, it has literal you can see for all to see what those consequences are. women dying because they can't get abortions, women being miserable because they can't get abortions, women having to travel through state lines wondering if they'll be able to get an abortion. That's just not acceptable or commensurate with the society, with the first world civilized modern life. So I think there are some, as I say in the book, there's a few real, clear examples of where that rhetoric leads you. And I think Hungary is a prime example because Hungary, Orban has been on this mission to kind of recruit all these anti-sexual revolution people from around the Anglophone world. Um, and, uh, and policy, his government's filled with these people. It's all kind of it's symbiotic. So policy can start to reflect some of that. And then there's also the Poland. But Poland is a bit different because it's that's coming from less tradwife like on TikTok and more ethno nationalists thinking from national conservatism. I don't think Poland is necessarily playing that exact game, but they've got all the Catholicism and something's changed there too because they've you can't get an abortion in Poland either. Maybe you never could, but it's very I wouldn't I think that's really sinister. And then you get just the flow of money. And so this rhetoric starts to make people more susceptible to they think, well, maybe I will join the anti-abortion movement. And then maybe the group will grow. And then so already American anti pro-life movements are sending a lot of money to British ones. And we know that we follow in the footsteps of American culture as well as everything else. And so I think the money will come in and it'll become emboldened. And what discourse does, that's why I take so much trouble over defining this discourse, is that it normalizes what you can say. And then it starts to attract people to it. And then you get kind of the basis of a political movement. And in terms of turning back the clock, I mean, the sexual revolution arguments just are pathetic, really, because they just don't know they obviously just haven't read they don't even maybe they've never read any, like, letters to Mary Stopes, or they haven't read any history at all about what it was like, what childbirth did to unwanted what not having control of your fertility was like for women, like, the bloodbath and the depression. I don't understand where they're not under they just obviously maybe they just don't know that there is a history there, maybe. I can't think of any other reason. I can actually. The other main reason is that they're very committed to and this is a very long running, through time immemorial, like with anti-Semitism, there is often for people a need to believe that women are somehow incapable of managing having a brain, and therefore they must be reduced to their bodies, and we must and to make men feel better, but also a lot of women seem invested in this, on the right, the kind of capacity for motherhood, and then motherhood itself must be, the be all and end all, and then not only that, but women are charged with the emotional care of the nation. So there's this idea that now we're in this like unraveled, alienated, atomized time and social fracture and everything's falling to pieces and single mothers galore and children growing up with iPads and everything else. And there's a sense that women are letting down the side with this because actually if they were doing their correct biological and God-given duty and staying home with, with breeding, all these children and getting married, then they would then the nation, the state of the nation and the West and the future of the whole world would be on a better track. So I think that that's also in there. It's always been the case that women are kind of not compensated for it at all, but expected to be the glue of the nation, and people worry that having whores, shag queens, albeit in I think relatively low numbers. I don't think that many people are into that, to be honest. Um, are, yeah, somehow stopping our societies from surviving. I mean, then there's the very specific panic over fertility, and the rates, the childbirth rates. I mean, yeah, I think all that stuff is just so it's just hysteria rooted in cherry-picked, statistics. I'm not saying there isn't we know what the birth rate is, like, I'm not a denier of fact, but the interpretations we have from that seem very a little bit over the top, and I think, yeah, that's how you know there's an issue, and that's how you know what we worry about. We worry about women doing what they're meant to do, which is to do with their bodies, instead of, like, whatever, and if you let women just have a good life, then they'll probably wanna have children anyway.
It's so striking that, one of the problems in the past is that women were seen as visceral rather than cerebral, and that's why they couldn't vote, that's why they weren't allowed to do A, B, and C, and now that's kind of coming back in this new politics. I did want to ask you specifically about, contraception, because there does seem to be, I don't know if this is overblown, you can tell me, I'm sure. And you talk about in your book about some of the claims made about contraception and its apparently damaging impact on young women. There does seem to be a bit of a turn against contraception, or a growing fear over its the hormonal interference that it gives rise to. So, what's your take on that? What do you how do you respond to that discussion?
Let's just say, personally, I'm not a fan of hormonal contraception myself, because I do think it has an effect, and it's for me. But I suppose I think that, yeah, so no one should take a medicine for the sake of being able to have chilled sex if it messes with the rest of their life. Like, the rest of your life is still more important than the downside of having to use a condom. So I think maybe what needs to so I think that, firstly, I've always thought, well, why can't they come up with a hormonal contraception that doesn't alter the mood, which they do to some degree. There's a few that are like coils with that give off some contraception, which are known to have less effects. But yeah, it's not great. Um, and I think, fertility and contraception has always been a messy business, and that's why you've got to have the backstop of abortion rights, because not everyone will take their pill on time. Not everyone will. Find that it agrees with them. But if you take the general mass of what the like, if you I suppose over the whole population, what the hormonal contraception does is that it does work for a lot of people, and what it did at the time was just unbelievable. And compared to it just goes to show, like, now we're in a position to evaluate whether things agree with us or not on quite subtle levels. But at the time, the amount of fear and discomfort and inconvenience caused by not having that kind of birth control was so huge that actually a bit of, like, well, not I shouldn't minimize it, but whatever the effects of the pill, which was more brutal then as well, the kind of pill they gave in the 60s, the late 60s, was nothing. It was just still like, wow, this is amazing, amazing freedom from the fear of getting pregnant, from having sex that shouldn't doesn't you don't want it to be reproductive. So, I mean, I suppose my response is that there are try it. If it doesn't work for you, you can just get scientific about other things. Don't buy bullshit. You can monitor your ovulate. So I never believed this, but you can pee on a you can get spend a little bit of money on a proper, like, monitor. You can find out exactly when you're gonna ovulate, and then you just, if you can have, if some timing works for you, you can you can be fairly reliable about that. I don't think just going by an app alone, works. I think you need to give it the pee on the stick thing, and that may be worth it for you because, then you just a bit of timing. I mean, sex does still always come with a few sacrifices, especially for the women. I think feel it, and that's partly why this is going to maybe shock you. I think men should pay for drinks and stuff on the date because actually, in the end, women have to. There's more stuff you have to worry about. Um, but there's other things, and I think condoms have really become this, like, thing that nobody wants to use, and it's like, no, are they really that bad? And maybe there should become a thing where boys are incentivized to use them, and it's cool or something, because that takes care of everything. And I just know that people aren't using them that much, and they think they don't need to worry about HIV or anything like that because these people don't remember what it was like. So I do think that contraception, I think we're getting to have higher standards about what we want to put up with and what we want to put in our bodies. But I do still think some of it is a lot of, like, hysterical. Not, no, I don't want to use that word. Sorry. I mean, men are perfectly capable of being hysterical. I just mean, it's become not just about some of the more extreme effects, but also about, like, there's a lot of woo woo that is coming into this. People are, like, trying to do contraception through, like, star signs, and there's a lot of that as well. And there's a lot of pseudoscience that has come into it. I did speak to Susan Faludi and a few other women who are very important feminist writers, who are deep into the stats and the science. And, they're just like, a lot of this stuff is just, it's just all discourse. It's not really about the effects. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I tend to agree with that, and I think people should choose the contraception they want to use, but at the same time, don't go down the fear mongering road. You don't have to be scared of these things. If they don't work for you, don't use them. But buying into that fearful narrative just creates that sense of victimization, of being a small, tiny, victimized person in a big bad world, which didn't bring me. I wanted to come on to that question, in fact, of victim culture, victim feminism, which people have been writing about for quite for some time, and you touch on it in your book as well, of course. It comes Me Too kind of energy boosted it to a certain extent. This idea that women are extremely vulnerable, very fragile. Um, is that still around, do you think? You know, part because one of the things I said about Me Too in my book after the pogrom is that it finished on 8th of October 2023, because on that day we were no longer told to believe women. In fact, we were told don't believe women, especially those women, because they lie. And in fact, the slogan became believe fascists, believe Hamas, believe them when they deny that they committed these sexual crimes. So it was interesting to me how Me Too and its ideology was thrown into slightly up in the air by the events of 7th of October, let's say. Um, how do you see it playing out over the past 2.5 years? Does it still have a grip on the imagination? Has it been weakened at all?
I mean, in a way, I'm now nostalgic for Me Too because it was relatively focused on sexual harassment, assault, that kind of thing, and it was a moment of focus for women and feminism, I suppose. And since then, I mean, certainly since Me Too, and then yeah, since October 7th, I think what I was describing earlier, my frustration with women and their political movement has been this total lack of focus and this bizarre, it's not that bizarre. It happened before in the 70s and the 80s, this glomming on to the Palestinian cause as the number one cause. And it's almost like the concerns of Me Too would be considered not enough about Palestine or something. Like that's literally how I feel about that. You've really noticed. One has really noticed that all those allegations, all those complaints have died down. And that might partly be because Me Too did result in such a big shakeup of corporate culture and workplace culture and general culture. And a lot of men probably just thought, well, I'm not going to bother even doing anything, let alone, asking someone out or anything. I don't know. But then it's interesting. There's also the question about whether sexual culture has actually gotten more violent in general because we're that much further on into girls and boys being immersed in influencer culture, and these people are gross. I mean, obviously being a liberal, I'm like, all right, if they give you value, then who am I to say? But I mean, it's a lot. It's a very crude there's quite a sort of aggressive tone to sexual culture, I think now, and that's probably just maybe that's dwarfed some of the sensibilities that were at play. I don't know. I mean, post October 7th, yeah, that's right. I just think what we've seen is feminists and Matthew Collings, explicitly denying engaging in rape denial. So, yeah, RIP Me Too. And not only RIP Me Too, but RIP feminism. It's just Palestinianism now. That's the byword for feminism. It was transism, but that now some of those gender critical people, I don't I have mixed feelings about them. I think that, like, yeah, they're right about the madness of the some of the trans stuff. But they've been really nasty to me, like, with this book. They're very doctrinaire, and they're not very friendly to other women who haven't done them any harm, and on the contrary, are trying to make the arguments I'm making. And they're not particularly pro-Israel. So, I mean, in fact, Nicole Lampert and I just did a big piece for Tablet about how feminism has been destroyed again by anti-Semitism, and, it begins with this bus stop at Philia, which is this big feminist conference. They flew in a Hamas supporter who was, like, well known for being that, and, these were gender critical some of them were these gender critical feminists, and they still were, like, just rabid, like, Palestine loving. So it's interesting. I would have thought that you could neatly, say, well, the trans all the gender critical ones are also the Zionists, and the overlap isn't as good as you'd think. So that just goes to show how overpowering the Palestinianism is. If even the gender critical ones who are capable of thinking outside the box are into it. I mean, J.K. Rowling has said not much about Israel, actually, and it'd be very useful if maybe she's got her hands full, to be fair, but it is the issue of our time, and I always knew it would be, and I always have felt that ever since I was just after 9/11 and then the second Intifada, was just before, and I've always known that, and it's always felt a bit like it's the Jews. We're always banging on about it, and we are always banging on about it. But so is everyone else now. So
It's extraordinary to me that, 7 or 8 years ago, if I wrote a piece saying, "Well, I'm not sure that actor should be cancelled simply for being bad on a first date or for clumsily asking someone out for a drink." If you said something like that during Me Too, you would be instantly cancelled. I used to get piled on by feminists all the time. And now some of those same feminists, not all of them, but some of them will say, "Of course no one was raped on 7th of October. How dare you dismiss Hamas's claims and believe these stupid women." I mean, it's extraordinary the turnaround.
that's right. And some of those women that might have jumped on you might now say, well, they're probably just cry even if it's not Israeli women, like the ones who might complain about sexual, they might say, "Well, it's just white woman's tears." That's the kind of thing you might get. Because don't forget that was before Black Lives Matter as well. So, yeah, this all these bad, ideologies, which are all probably the same, have kind of infiltrated. And yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, what is feminism? What's under that mask? Not good stuff right now.
Zoe, I could ask you a million more questions. In fact, I've got at least 50 more written down, but I'm just gonna
Let's
ask
do
you
it
one.
again. Let's
Yeah,
do
we'll do it
another
again, but
one. Part 2.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask you one more before I let you go, if that's all
Yeah.
right. You make this really good point, in the book, and I've seen you make it elsewhere, which is that, liberation, being free, often comes with risks, and it can be difficult, and you can get hurt and wounded and become sad. You make this great point in the book that it's better to be free and miserable than unfree and miserable, which I think is a great rallying cry. What do you think we can do to encourage, I guess, young people in particular, especially young women, although young men too, to be more open to taking risks and recognizing that being a free, autonomous person means taking risks? How do you think we can go about that in the future?
The first thing is that they should all buy a copy of my book and read it very carefully multiple times. That will help them. No, it really will. Um, uh, I genuinely think that the way we can help, well, so in all seriousness, things like my book are part of it. I think it's the stories we lay out for people that people make meaning in their lives and they make their decisions about what to do, and their sense of danger, their sense of risk, their sense of value, their sense of what choices to make and what not to make kind of come from the scripts and the stories that are available to them. And if we tell them a story about themselves and the culture, that everything's terrible and they should and these risks are just everything's trauma, then they will be what they are now. If we or not all, but some, many. Um and they'll believe absolute insane rubbish about the climate. I mean, the climate is real, but you know what I mean, like the Greta Thunberg apocalyptic stuff. Um, or we can tell them stories that the world, that they have agency, that they can choose how they go out in the world, even up against um challenges and horrible things that happen. I mean, I mentioned in the book Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and his whole thing is like he managed to survive Auschwitz by basically having a good attitude. But I mean that's not obviously there was luck involved as well. But the point, we have a crisis of in a way it's a crisis of consciousness, 'cause just to use the word false consciousness, we have a crisis of agency, a crisis of understanding the link between us as persons and our choices and the world. And there's this sense that like we are who we are, but we're constantly up against a system that's forcing us away from what we want to do, or and that's the narrative we have to challenge. I think with girls especially, it's just about that extra little note, like voice in your head that says, when you hear yourself say, "I can't do something," or I probably, just interrogate, like, can I really not? Like, what would happen if I did? Like, what would happen if I just even asked the question? Could I start with that? And it's the same with boys. Like, could I just, could this be a narrative that I've believe, or is it actually the way things are? Like, what would happen if I, again, asked the question, could I do this? Might I do that? Is there a way out of this bad situation? Can I endure a little bit of discomfort or a lot of discomfort for the sake of something more that I want? And, we know of people who've been through such hellish, difficult um, things in childhood, and they're trapped because they're children, And somehow they come up with ways in their heads to focus on something they want in the future, and then they can kind of get there. And, yeah, so it's about framing, and it's about I just don't want girls, I partly wrote this book with my own daughter in mind, who's only 2. It's like, I just don't want her going out into the world as a marked victim, feeling like a marked victim. I just want her to assume no one's gonna beat her, like, no one's gonna rape her, like, no one's gonna I mean, someone might I bet obviously, please God, they don't, but she should just assume that if she wants to be interested in that, she's gonna be interested in that. She wants to do chess, she can do chess. Like, that's she if she wants to take that risk, okay, let's take that risk. You only live once, like, why not? Why not? Like, bad things might happen, but bad things might not happen. And people are so resistant, and that I got so this whole book has given me I've had so much nasty blowback just from the simple idea that bad things happen and not but bad things happen, then let's all go home and cry and it's all been a failure. Bad things happen, and that is what and we also get to do all these amazing things. And this is the thing, this is what I can't this whole narrative that the whole book originated out of the anti-sexual revolution people who say, "Oh, well, I guess it didn't work. Like, there's still, like, women still aren't 50-50 in certain fields, and there's still sexual violence, and women are still dying in blah, blah, blah." Um, so I guess it was a failure. And actually, their real interest is not in women in professional fields. It's women are actually miserable because they have to go back to work after having children, and the professional world just isn't suited to women. And we can see that because women are depressed and so. And I'm just like, we've had what, 30 years in which all think women have had roughly equal opportunities? 30 out of however long human life has been on this planet. I can't even remember how long that is, but that's a very small amount of time to give women before you conclude it's all a mistake. So maybe we should just give it a little bit more time and see what happens. And while we're at it, kind of challenge some of this like ridiculous defeatism. By the way, we see the same thing with Iran. It's like, oh, guess we've lost that one. What's been 2 weeks? It's over. I mean, like people are just yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other narrative. But I still, so here I am being very like gloomy and bitchy, I suppose. But I think that's just I still stand by Britain. I still think this is a really good I think that if you're comparing it to other countries, like, where else are you gonna go? Where's better? Tell me that. I mean, the US has many strengths, but I don't think it's in a great place since Trump. I'm not a Trump fan, really. Uh, but and I don't like other aspects of it. But still, I mean, it's America at the end of the day. But Britain is like, still pretty there's a lot to kind of fight for really, and just to appreciate, I suppose, beneath all the anger which we all rightly feel, and we can see all the mistakes being made. It's still like it's got the best bones of any country, I think, in the world.
Zoe, thank you very much.